Hey, it's Dr. Adam Nally. I'm coming to you this evening. It's a Monday evening. I thought I would talk to you about glucose, sugar, or carbohydrates, and insulin, how that affects our body. Some basics in regards to why I recommend a ketogenic diet. I've heard so many people in the last couple weeks actually talk about how a ketogenic diet is just a fad and it doesn't work and it's not really what's happening. It really comes down to calories. And so I thought tonight I would go back to some basics and just talk about a little bit of basics in regards to glucose, because I'm hearing a lot of people get really confused about their blood sugar, what it means in relationship to ketones and things of that nature. So my name is Dr. Adam Nally. I'm a board certified family physician and a board certified obesity medicine specialist. I practice in Surprise, Arizona. I've been in practice about 20 years. I've been doing ketogenic lifestyles with my patients and myself for about 15 years. And so really enjoy doing this and have been really excited in regards to what I see in regards to the outcomes. In fact, I wrote a whole book about the ketogenic diet called The Keto Cure. If you haven't gone to my website at docmuscles.com, go check that out. You can get a signed copy of my book there, or you can buy it on Amazon. It's called The Keto Cure. I know a number of people are going to be signing in. Hello, you guys. It's wonderful to see you. I'm going to try to take some questions at the end of this. So if you have your questions, hold them or pop them in there, and then I'll try to answer them toward the end. It's good to see you guys. If you're new to the broadcast, put a 1 in the chat box. If you're also tell me where you're coming from, so it'd be nice to I know where a lot of my audience is at, and I can kind of tailor my comments to you and things that you may need. My hope is that I can help you out. Let me put up on the screen here my name. My name is Dr. Adam Nally. So many of you know me, you may not know me. Hopefully you're seeing this either on Facebook Live or YouTube. Once this is up once I get the recording set on Facebook Live, I'll roll this over to YouTube and it'll be available on YouTube at YouTube/Dr. Nally, and that's where it'll be located at. So it's good to see you guys. So what I thought I would talk about tonight is glucose, sugars. And so I wanted to kind of define for a minute what exactly is glucose, what is a sugar, what does it mean? So the basic fuel that the body uses when your body is using sugars or starches is that it uses something called glucose. Now, glucose is a single molecule. When you combine molecules together, like fructose or galactose, you bind them together, you actually create two double and triple bonds of sugars. Those sugars then are called different names. Like lactose is a combination of two different forms of sugar. Sucrose, which is table sugar, is a fructose and a glucose together. So we see a lot of different forms of sugar that are present. We call table sugar is a glucose and a fructose molecule bound together. There are different forms of carbohydrate or sugars, and we use that term we toss that term around a lot, but it's important to understand that any of the complex sugars or complex carbohydrates can be broken into a single unit of either glucose, fructose, or galactose, and those sugars then can be used, or I call them sugars. Those forms of carbohydrates can be used in the body for fuel. However, the body can use another fuel called ketones when it burns fat. Now, there's in regards to the use of sugars and fats, I hear a lot of people use the term sugar burner or fat burner, and that's a misnomer, and it does an injustice or an inservice to those of you that don't understand what it means. Your body is always using a little bit of carbohydrate or starch or sugar, and it can use a predominant amount of it, or it can use a smaller amount, and it can use a larger amount of ketone when it burns fat. And so there's this shift back and forth between more ketones, less sugar, more sugar, less ketones. And so it's kind of a seesaw effect that occurs. What we find is if you're wanting to lose fat or you're wanting to increase your overall health, we find that as we lower the sugar increase and we increase the ketone level, health benefits dramatically improve. In fact, 16 different disease processes improve. And that's what I wrote the book, The Keto Cure, about in regards to the different 16 diseases that I see that dramatically improve when we lower the overall intake of sugar and we use ketone as our primary fuel. So that's something very important to understand. Now, the issue is, what really helps me get into that state of ketosis? What do I need to do? Well, the first thing that I tell people is you need to lower the carbohydrate intake to less than 20 grams per day. That means you need to cut the starches down so that your overall starch or sugar or glucose intake or carbohydrate intake is less than 20 grams total. Now, leafy greens, if it's a leaf and it's green, it contains cellulose, which is a form of carbohydrate, but they have double bonds that our stomachs can't break down. Cows and horses and ruminants can break them down, but we can't unless we grind them juice them, blend them, or cook them, then you can activate some of those molecules. But for the most part, if you eat them raw, you can't access them in your stomach. And so leafy greens are the exception to that. But any other form of starch is a sugar, and your body will take some from that. And so you have to be aware of that. It'll have a rise in your overall blood sugar over a period of anywhere from 1 to 5 hours if you ingest those types of carbohydrates. So it's important to understand that. Those are a little bit about sugar and starch and what that means. Issue number 2, and I wanted to show you some slides here. I'm going to try to show you what happens here in a second. Let me make sure if you if you have a lot of starch or sugar in your body produces insulin, and as your insulin levels go up, and I'm going to show you a slide here so we can see this, and hopefully you'll be able to see this. Let me show this there. Oops. Let me pull it up here. Maybe I can do it this way. All right. So, and maybe I'll do, that's not gonna work. Let's do it that way. So in regards to, if you have a large amount of starch or sugar and your body produces a large amount of insulin, these are all the exciting disease processes that can arise if your body predominantly functions off of glucose and has a high insulin level. The insulin is what drives the inflammation and drives a lot of these disease processes to occur. So it's important to understand that. That's one of the things that I wanted you to recognize or to see. What I'm going to show you now is that if you for a long time, and I'm going to click through a couple of slides because I want to show you one that's set here for you. That's nice. If I can get it there. Oh, where did it go? There it is right there. Next one. So if you have a insulin resistance or something of that nature, I'm going to click to this slide here. So this is basically a slide from my book, and it's taken from Dr. Kraft's information and from my personal experience over the last 20 years or so, that as you normally, if you are, and hopefully you can see my cursor right here moving around on the screen, if you're on an iPhone or iPad, I'm sorry. If you essentially have normal insulin response, that insulin level should be less than 5 when you're fasting. If it's higher than 5, you are overproducing insulin in response to starch and sugar. And that's really where the problem is. It's not so much the sugar that's the problem with prediabetes or diabetes or weight gain. It's the insulin response to that sugar. And that's a genetic predisposition. Now, 2 hours after the meal, that insulin level should drop below 40. But what ends up happening is 20 years before you ever become a diabetic, and this is essentially, I'll show you, type 2 diabetes is essentially the 4th stage of what we call insulin resistance. In the 2nd stage, your insulin fasting will be somewhere between 6 and 30. And I see literally 85% of the population has their insulin levels in this range when they come into my office. Anything between 11 and 30, well, let me see, 2 hours after you eat the meal, that insulin level will drop down to somewhere between 40 to 90, and it really should be less than 40. But in stage 3, that insulin level never really drops. It stays at 90 to 150. And then in stage 4, which is actually type 2 diabetes, these people are producing huge amounts of insulin even at a fast, and their insulin levels are around 31 or above 31 when they fast, and they stay above 150 after a meal. And that high insulin is what drives the weight gain. Insulin is literally the only hormone that stimulates a little enzyme called lipoprotein lipase that takes the fat out of the fat cell and pulls it into your fat cells. Or it takes the fat out of the cholesterol molecule, or the transport of fat in the bloodstream, and pulls it into the fat cell. If you do not have insulin present, you cannot get fat to enter the fat cell. If you have too much insulin present, that fat cell gets bigger and bigger and bigger at a much more rapid rate. So I explain this by saying, look, if I were to give you a piece of bread, you should produce a slice worth of insulin. But for someone like me who comes from a family of very insulin resistant people, if you give me a slice of bread, I produce 10 times the insulin in response to that bread. And essentially stage 3 is 10 times the insulin in response to that bread. That means I produce 10 times the insulin, and insulin lasts for about 12 hours. It stays active in the system for about 12 hours, and it stimulates fat storage at 10 times the normal rate for the next 12 hours. So that's why if I eat 2 pieces of bread, one in the morning, one at night, I'm storing fat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If I walk by the bakery, I gain weight. And many of you will understand this, and it'll ring true with you, because this is essentially what insulin resistance is. It's an overproduction of insulin in response to any form of sugar, whether that be glucose, galactose, fructose, or any of those sugars that are present. This is what's happening. And that's why it's important for you to understand this. This is why I've been harping on this for about 15 years, trying to help people understand. So Now, why does the body do that, or what's the mechanism behind that? Well, before we talk about that mechanism, what I want you to understand is that the fat cell has some functions. And when I was in medical school, we were told that the fat cell really had essentially three functions. It was to provide cushion, it was to provide insulation, and gave us this unlimited ability to store energy. And these little yellow things over here, these are electron micrographs of fat cells with triglyceride and cholesterol inside of them. What we learned about 5 to 10 years ago was that the fat cell is actually the largest endocrine gland in the body, and it produces a huge number of hormones, most of which drive the communication between your liver and your pancreas. And it's actually your fat cells that modulate the amount of glucose your liver produces, not so much the insulin. Insulin is just a counterbalance that's produced by the pancreas to try to lower that blood sugar. So what I mean by that is that normally your body wants to keep the blood sugar somewhere between 70 and 100 throughout the day. And it'll produce more insulin if the sugar goes up, and it'll produce less insulin if the sugar goes down. But and it does that because the brain, a certain section of the brain, needs a small amount of glucose, about 100 grams per day. Your liver makes 240 grams no matter what you do, but the liver's job is to regulate that blood sugar in that range. If it doesn't, it throws everything out of whack. Well, your fat cells have a significant effect on that liver regulation. And what I'm going to show you here is that this tumor necrosis factor alpha and interleukin 6 play a big role on the way your body handles insulin. And these other enzymes or hormones that are produced by the fat cells themselves actually have a negative effect on the liver's ability to regulate that blood sugar. So if you have insulin resistance, if you're pre-diabetic or you're diabetic, it's not because of a broken pancreas, it's because of broken fat cells, sick fat cells that are overproducing these hormones. And that's really what's driving this process. So I hope that is giving you a little bit of clarity in regards to that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to click the slides here so you can see what's going on. I'm going to bring this back here and hopefully you can see this. It's kind of hidden. My face kind of hides it, but this is the pancreas over here. Right here, you can actually right here you can see the pancreas. So your liver is producing this glucose at a regulatory rate, and the insulin where this red is a counterbalance in the liver's production of glucose. Again, the liver wants to maintain that blood sugar somewhere between 70 and 100 to make your brain happy, but enter in the fat cells. The fat cells produce a number of hormones. I've only got 5 of them referenced here: tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin 6, resistant leptin, adiponectin. These hormones have an influence on the liver. Adiponectin, leptin, these two hormones actually suppress the amount of glucose, and we like them. But as the fat cell gets bigger, you produce less adiponectin, and actually leptin is produced in either a lower or higher amount based on how the fat cell responds. Resistant actually stimulates increased glucose. So as the fat cell gets bigger, you're producing more and more resistance. And this is what's really driving that abnormal glucose problem. The other thing that drives it is that tumor necrosis factor alpha and interleukin 6, amazingly, these are the same hormones involved in cancer, have a suppressive effect on insulin, so that even though your body's producing insulin to try to balance out the glucose, that insulin won't work. And this is where insulin resistance comes from. It comes from overproduction of tumor necrosis factor alpha and interleukin 6 and their negative effect on insulin, even though you're producing it when you really should be. So this is that regulatory balance between your fat cell, your liver, and your pancreas. And it's important to see this. And I've talked about this before, but I wanted to talk about it in relationship to glucose and how it affects us. Now, why is a ketogenic diet beneficial? Well, the amazing thing about ketones is when you're insulin resistant, like I am or many of my patients are, or you're diabetic, you're pre-diabetic, you overproduce this insulin, your blood sugar stays a little high. And what I mean by that is, let's say we check your fasting blood sugar. Normally it should be under 100. Yours is 103 or 107 or even 140 with those that are type 2 diabetics. If we can shift your body into a state of ketosis where you actually don't eat starch, you don't eat sugar, and all you're eating is protein and fat, and your body's then forced to take the fat in the fat cell. The fat cell begins to shrink. It produces ketones, and those ketones have a tremendous effect in regulating or down-regulating the effect of the fat cells' hormones on the liver. So it allows the glucose to balance and lower back to its normal level where it's supposed to be at. This is the amazing thing that I've seen about putting people into a ketogenic state, is that the ketone itself acts as a signaling molecule as well as a fuel. And this is why putting you in that ketogenic state is so important. So it's really, really cool. So that's important. This is basically insulin. It's supposed to look like a key, but it's really the regulator of fat. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change to one more slide here. I've got to pull it out and see if I can locate it. And so the big key that I want you to understand or take away from this is that insulin really truly is what's broken. It's the amount of insulin being produced. And it's not because the pancreas is ineffective. It's because the fat cells are overfilled. They're overproducing hormone. We've got to bring those down. So no amount of pill, nothing like that is going to fix the problem. What fixes the problem, and the only thing that I've seen that's been effective in reversing diabetes, in reversing this insulin resistance, is actually not eating starches, not eating sugars, cutting out the oatmeal and the fruit and those kind of things, eating proteins and fats. That's really what it comes down to. You can have the leafy greens in most cases, but in reality, the big issue is we got to cut the starches and the carbohydrates to less than 20 grams. When you do that, it allows those fat cells to begin to shrink. They begin to produce less and less hormone. And this is why it takes 18 to 24 months for a person to balance out and have that insulin resistance improve, is because you've got to get those fat cells to shrink. If they don't shrink, they're not effective. And if you're somebody like me who's very insulin resistant, it takes a while to get those fat cells to shrink. And even when we've got them almost there, there's still overproduction of those hormones and still a higher, you still may see a higher fasting blood sugar. Don't get discouraged by that. I've had some patients get really discouraged by that. Don't. Just be patient. This takes time. You have to ride through a number of plateaus that are going to occur in your weight loss. That's normal. That's the body's protective mechanism. I have patients that just freak out. Dr. Nally, I've been doing this for 18 months and it's not working and I haven't lost much weight. I mean, they've lost like 30 pounds, but then they halt. Well, again, the body doesn't want to change. Because it's not safe, and the body knows that. So if the body suddenly changes weight, there's a safety issue that arises from other hormones and things of that nature. So the body attempts to maintain what's called homeostasis. It wants to stay in its place. So be wary that that's the case. Now, I wanted to show you the slide. I may have shown this to you before. I'm just going to click on here and show you to again. These little blue things with yellow tails that you see right here are essentially triglycerides. These are fat. As you put fat into your stomach and it goes into the intestine, it's pulled into little molecules called chylomicrons, which is essentially the largest molecule of cholesterol, cholesterol molecule, and those float up and down through the bloodstream. And then when insulin is present, insulin stimulates this little hormone called this little enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, and that pulls the fat right into the fat cell. Without insulin, that enzyme is not on. So you cannot gain weight without insulin. That's why type 1 diabetics who don't make any insulin whatsoever are skinny as a rail. Unless you give them a large amount of insulin, they will not gain weight. And that's really what we end up seeing there. So I wanted you to see that as well. That's really the driver behind it. So if you have excess weight on your system, it's because you're producing too much insulin, period, end of story. That's where we see any deposition of fat is driven by an abnormal production of insulin at that area. That's just what it is. And if you can decrease the insulin level at that area by not taking it into your mouth, that's the easiest and most effective and cheapest way to solve the problem. So it's something I wanted you to be aware of there. Anyway, I know some of you are probably watching this in the bathroom, and I don't want your legs to go numb if you're watching in the bathroom. So I'm going to make it brief, and we'll answer some questions for you. But I was going to say, let's see. Mark says, hello from Maryland. You're reading it. No, the body does not want to change. Let's see. Hey, Anna, how are you? Super slow for me. Oh, is it running slow? I'm sorry, guys. Hopefully it'll record and it won't be slow and nasty on the recording, but hopefully it's clear. Let's see. I'm going to see if you have any questions, pop them in here. I am going to take a look here. Let's see. Marianne says, been keto for over a year and fasted insulin went from 9 to 11. Now remember, Marianne, your insulin level is directly related to what's happened in the last 12 hours. So if you had poor sleep, if you're sick, if you're ill, if you have a bladder infection, if you are under a lot of stress, if you have a flare-up of your arthritis, that insulin level may creep up a little bit because it's a response to stress as well. So don't be puzzled by that. Remember, insulin, if you had your blood test and your insulin was high, that's a response to what's happened to you in the last 12 hours. So be aware of that. Love the Keto Cure. Thank you. That's awesome. Thanks, Mandy, for telling me that. I'm just scanning through here. I know there's a bunch of people that signed on, and I appreciate you being here. If this has helped you, if you like this, please share it out. Please go to my YouTube page and like it and subscribe. That way, whenever I pop up or these pop up, they'll be there available for you. How many carbs should you have each meal or per day? So Dana, it was Dana. Dana, let me pop your question up on here so you can see it. So Dana says, how many carbs should you have? I tell people I don't want them to have any more than 20 grams per day. That is usually, unless it's a leafy green that's raw, you should be okay that way. Great. When Anna says it's working great, that's good. All right. Hi, my psoriatic Arthritis is still progressing after 3 years on a ketogenic diet. Do you have any specific ideas how to reduce TNF and inflammatory? So, Janie, the first thing I'd say is there's probably something driving your inflammation, and there may be something in your diet that's still driving your insulin. We'd have to look closely at what your diet actually is. A lot of people tell me I'm keto, but they actually aren't. They're doing something in their diet that's driving that process, or there's an inflammatory process that's going on that's causing a problem there. So that would be something we want to look closely at. Diana said A1C is down to 5.6 from 8.5. Congratulations. You literally have reversed your diabetes. That's what you've done. That is a reversal of diabetes. Congratulations, Diana.